Imagine walking into a town where time stopped, where the air carries whispers of lives erased, and where every crumbling wall holds secrets you were never meant to hear. Now picture this. In 1876, a town vanished overnight. No war, no famine, no record, just gone, like it was erased from existence. Welcome to the forbidden shadows of America's ghost towns, forgotten relics that once thrived with ambition, greed, and blood. These aren't just empty streets. They are the skeletons of a hidden history, one they never taught you. The history of power taken, of lives controlled, and of communities wiped clean from the map. And what's worse, some say these towns didn't die. They were silenced. What you're about to uncover is not folklore. It's the uncomfortable truth buried beneath layers of dirt, concrete, and silence. In the heart of the Nevada desert, the town of Rhyolite once glittered with promise, home to thousands, booming with banks, schools, and grand hotels. But within 5 short years, it was dead. No one dares ask why, but the few who did found more than ruins. They found records missing, names crossed out, and newspapers that printed stories which never happened. It was a gold rush town. But the gold didn't vanish. The people did. And Rhyolite is just the beginning. We'll descend deeper together into the forgotten. You'll see how towns were built not just on resources but on control, on systems designed to extract, manipulate, and then discard. And the same forces that erased these places, they still exist. This journey will change how you see history, forever. If you think these ghost towns are just tourist attractions or relics for dusty textbooks, think again. These were battlegrounds, where dreams collided with greed, where the powerful tested psychological control systems under the guise of progress. They tested it on whole towns, entire populations like experiments, behind closed doors, and when it went wrong, they buried the evidence, one town at a time. We are going to expose them, but be warned, once you hear these truths, there's no unhearing them. This knowledge, it will alter the way you see your country, your leaders, and your own history. Welcome to the forgotten history of America's ghost towns. Now step carefully. The silence hides more than decay. It hides the truth they don't want you to know. Let's begin. Deep in the heart of Montana lies Bannack, a town that rose like a phoenix in 1862 when gold was discovered along Grasshopper Creek. Thousands descended like locusts, their eyes glinting with dreams of fortune. But what they found was something else. Bannack was lawless, ruthless, and soaked in blood. For a brief moment it was the territorial capital, but behind the grand facade, darkness reigned. Its sheriff, Henry Plummer, was hailed as a hero, a man of order in chaos. But truth has a way of festering in shadows. Secretly, Plummer was leading a gang of road agents, organized criminals who robbed stagecoaches and slaughtered travelers. The very man sworn to protect was orchestrating terror from within. When suspicions surfaced, the people took justice into their own hands. Vigilantes formed, hanging not just Plummer but 22 men without trial. But here's where the truth fractures. Diaries and letters recovered years later reveal that some of those hanged were innocent, executed not by justice, but by fear. And then, as swiftly as it bloomed, Bannack began to rot. The gold dried up, and with it the population. Buildings were left half-finished, businesses abandoned overnight, and a silence fell, thick and permanent. Historians say it was just the fate of a boomtown. But dig deeper. The vigilante movement spread like wildfire through Montana afterward. Ordinary citizens emboldened to act as judge, jury, and executioner. Was this chaos or control? Some say Bannack was the proving ground, a social experiment in fear-based order where psychological dominance could be tested on an entire population under the mask of frontier justice. And when the experiment succeeded, when people surrendered their autonomy to fear, they moved on, leaving behind empty buildings and mass graves. Today, Bannack stands frozen, its streets eerily intact, like a preserved stage set. But inside, the walls are cracked with bullet holes and the ground hides more than dust. Walk through its saloon and you'll hear creaking, not from the wind but from the weight of history written in blood. Ask yourself, why are these stories missing from schoolbooks? Why is Bannock a tourist attraction, not a national scandal? Because the story isn't over, it's repeating. And just like Bannock, you're walking streets built by design. The difference? You're still alive. For now, we go deeper. The next town has a secret that was buried alive. In the scorched wilderness of California's Sierra Nevada lies Bodie, a name you may have heard whispered by those who dare to remember, but forget what the brochures tell you. Bodie wasn't just a gold mining town. It was a crucible of vice, corruption, and unchecked human greed. By 1879, Bodie had exploded into one of the largest towns in California, with a population nearing 10,000. But gold wasn't its only currency. Here, survival was paid in blood. Bodie earned its infamous reputation as a sea of sin lashed by the tempests of lust and passion. 29 saloons lined Main Street. Gambling halls, opium dens, and brothels flourished under the eye of a sheriff who never showed his face. Men disappeared. Women vanished. Children were orphaned overnight. Newspapers spoke of shootouts in broad daylight, but the real horror unfolded behind closed doors. Beneath the town's opulent hotels, hidden tunnels ran through the earth, some say for smuggling, others whisper darker purposes. Trafficking, experiments, rituals. Then came the fires, 3 in just 5 years, all mysteriously starting in buildings where records were kept. No investigations, no arrests, only silence. But Bodie didn't die from fire. It was strangled. In 1881, gold production mysteriously collapsed, though geologists insisted the veins ran deep. Within months, investors pulled out. The mines closed. By 1885, Bodie was a ghost. The question is, why? What really happened in those tunnels? Some letters recovered decades later, suppressed by local officials, speak of strange gatherings in the hills, masked figures, chants in languages not spoken. One miner wrote, "The gold is cursed. It takes your soul before your life." Others claimed to hear screams at night, screams that didn't sound human. Today, Bodie is frozen in time, arrested decay they call it. Buildings untouched, plates still set on tables, children's too, is collecting dust. But every step you take there feels watched, judged, as if the town itself remembers you. And here's the chilling truth. Bodie wasn't just abandoned, it was sealed, locked in a time capsule of trauma. Those who live nearby refuse to enter after dark. And tourists? They often return with more than photos. Nightmares, voices, a sense of being followed. Bodie is not dead. It waits. For what? For whom? We continue. The next ghost town was erased from maps and from memory. Until now, in the vast desert of Nevada, there once stood a town named St. Thomas, a place swallowed not by time but by water. Today it rests beneath the surface of Lake Mead, its ruins occasionally revealed when the reservoir recedes, like bones exposed from a shallow grave. But make no mistake, St. Thomas did not drown naturally. It was sacrificed. Founded by Mormon settlers in 1865, St. Thomas thrived for decades on farming, trade, and grit. It stood resilient through flood and famine. But in the 1930s, the federal government announced the construction of the Hoover Dam, a monumental project cloaked in the language of progress and necessity. Behind the scenes, however, something else was at play. Letters and transcripts show that St. Thomas was never part of the original dam flood zone plan. It was added later, abruptly, without public discourse. Why? That's the riddle. Some believe the town's location, at the crossroads of ancient trade routes and near rumored indigenous burial grounds, made it a target for removal. Others whisper of underground chambers discovered beneath the town's church, sealed by concrete just before evacuation orders were given. The government offered compensation, pennies on the dollar. Those who refused to leave found their homes submerged as water levels rose inch by inch. The last resident, Hugh Lord, rowed away in a boat as the waters licked his doorstep in 1938. But here's what they won't tell you. During the dry spells of the 1950s and 1980s, divers found more than ruins. Reports emerged of strange symbols carved into the stone foundations, symbols not matching any known culture. Some divers vanished, others refused to speak of what they saw. One wrote, "The town below watches you, it does not forget." And now, in recent years, as Lake Mead's waters recede due to drought, St. Thomas is surfacing again. The town's bones are visible, accusing haunted. Historians call it a marvel, but to those who remember or dare to feel, St. Thomas is a warning. It was a community erased not for necessity but for secrecy, and what lies beneath the mud and water is not just history. It's a buried truth. We are descending further. Next, we uncover a town that vanished from maps and from the minds of those who lived nearby, as if it never existed at all. In the dense forests of Pennsylvania, there exists a place you won't find on most maps, Centralia. To the untrained eye, it looks like an ordinary abandoned town, but Centralia isn't just abandoned, it's burning, and it has been for over 60 years. The story told to the public is simple. In 1962, a landfill fire accidentally ignited an exposed coal seam beneath the town. Officials assured residents it would burn out in weeks, but the fire didn't stop. It spread, silently, invisibly, beneath homes, schools, and churches. Toxic gases seeped through cracks in the earth. Roads buckled, sinkholes opened without warning, swallowing trees, cars, and almost a child in 1981. By then, the government declared Centralia uninhabitable. They forced evacuations, boarded up buildings, and seized property through eminent domain. Today, only a handful of residents remain, defiant, refusing to abandon the land of their ancestors. But the official story doesn't add up. Why was the fire never extinguished despite decades of technological advancement? And why did officials wait years before admitting the danger, allowing residents to breathe poison and walk above flames? Some believe the coal wasn't the only thing burning. Leaked documents suggest Centralia sat atop a vast, uncharted vein of anthracite, worth billions. And that fire, it was too convenient, too targeted. Whistleblowers claimed the fire's point of origin wasn't the landfill at all, but a deliberate ignition near the richest coal deposits. A fire that would drive residents away, allowing the state to seize the land and mineral rights. But it didn't stop with land. Centralia's evacuation became a blueprint, used to study mass relocation, control through fear, and the psychological impact of environmental catastrophe. Residents were watched, their letters intercepted, their resistance silenced. Some vanished. And here's the most disturbing part. The fire is still burning today, deep underground, hidden from sight, spreading like a living thing. Scientists estimate it could burn for another 250 years. But to those who walk its cracked streets, Centralia isn't a town. It's a wound, a testament to greed and manipulation masquerading as tragedy. And if you listen closely, amid the steam and silence, you can hear it breathing. Centralia was not just abandoned, it was sacrificed, and it is not alone. The next ghost town was built by prisoners for prisoners, and its walls still whisper. Let's keep going, the descent has just begun. On an isolated stretch of land in the Mississippi Delta, there once stood a town named Parchman, not a town in the traditional sense, but a prison empire. Officially called the Mississippi State Penitentiary, Parchman was founded in 1901, but for decades it functioned as a self-contained world, a ghost town in waiting, built by prisoners, run by force and hidden from history books. Parchman wasn't just a place of incarceration. It was a plantation, a forced labor camp masquerading as justice. Thousands of inmates, mostly black men arrested under vague vagrancy laws, were worked to death under the southern sun. They plowed fields, harvested cotton, and built the very buildings they would die in, all under the watch of armed guards on horseback. The echoes of slavery weren't just present, they were systematized. This was not punishment, this was profit. And like all ghost towns, the truth was buried in plain sight. Parchman was a ghost town in reverse. People didn't leave, they vanished within. Official reports spoke of discipline and order, but survivor testimonies tell a different tale. Torture chambers called dark holes, men chained together in iron collars, and routine beatings disguised as discipline. Some say strange experiments took place, medical procedures without consent, injections whose purpose was never explained. The town outside the gates shrank as fear grew. Families disappeared overnight, land was seized, and the local economy became dependent on prison labor. Generations were trapped, children of inmates often arrested as teens, brought back to Parchman, ensuring the cycle continued. This wasn't just a prison, it was a psychological control system, a place where the state could erase identity, purpose, and resistance. And like many ghost towns, Parchman was never abandoned. It still operates today. But parts of it, whole buildings, rows of cells, have been led, shut off after riots, fires, and too many unexplained deaths. These abandoned wings stand silent, decaying monuments to institutional corruption. Guards refuse to enter them. They say the walls whisper, that the air grows cold, that the past lingers. Parchman is not a relic, it's a living ghost town, a forbidden history still unfolding, and its story is just one of many where justice was a mask and control the true motive. What's next? A town built by oil, ruled by violence, and erased by corporate greed. We continue our descent, deeper into the shadows. Buried beneath the wind-swept plains of Texas, there once thrived a place called Thurber, a company town born in the late 1800s, built entirely by the Texas and Pacific Coal Company. At its height, Thurber wasn't just a mining town, it was an industrial fortress. Home to over 10,000 workers, it had paved streets, electric lights, schools, and even an opera house. But don't be fooled by its surface glamour. Thurber was a prison without walls. Every building, every home, every piece of land was owned by the company. Workers were paid not in dollars, but in company scrip. Currency usable only at company-owned stores where prices were inflated, debts were tracked, and lives were monitored. Surveillance was constant, letters were opened, conversations recorded, and unionization efforts crushed with brutal efficiency. Those who resisted disappeared, quietly transferred, exiled, or worse. The coal that flowed from Thurber powered railroads, factories, and the rise of Texas industry. But beneath the prosperity was exploitation on an industrial scale. Children as young as 8 worked in the mines. Wages were docked for infractions like coughing or resting. Accidents were common, but few were recorded. In 1903, a miners' strike erupted, demanding real pay, basic rights, and human dignity. The company responded with private mercenaries, firepower, and a media blackout. Blood was spilled, graves were filled, and then came the pivot. In the 1920s, oil surpassed coal, and Thurber's usefulness ended. But instead of allowing the town to evolve or be handed back to its people, the company dismantled it, systematically. Buildings were razed, records burned, entire families forced out, some literally at gunpoint. By 1933, Thurber was a ghost town. Only the smokestack remains, towering like a tombstone over a forgotten battlefield. But why erase a town so thoroughly? The answer lies in contrasts. Thurber was not just an economic engine, it was a test case, a prototype for total institutional domination. The company controlled birth, death, education, faith, and labor, and when it ended, they didn't want evidence to remain. Documents recently unearthed suggest the company experimented with behavior modification, testing substances and routines on miners without consent, psychological warfare under the guise of employment. And it didn't end with Thurber. The blueprint spread. Company towns multiplied, and so did the control systems. Thurber was sacrificed, its people discarded, its history suppressed. But the experiment continued elsewhere. Our descent now takes us to a town built on uranium, a place poisoned by radiation and lies. Let's go further. In the barren high desert of Utah, there lies a place few dare to speak of, Uravan. At first glance, it was a typical mining town born in the 1930s during the fevered rush for uranium. But Uravan was never ordinary. It was created, from its first brick to its last breath, as a weapon. Officially, Uravan mined vanadium, used for strengthening steel. But beneath that cover, uranium was quietly extracted. Uranium that would fuel the Manhattan Project and help build the first atomic bomb. The people of Uravan didn't know. They were told they were patriots working for the good of the nation. Their homes were paid for, their schools funded, their lives seemingly secure. But what they didn't know was this: their town was poisoned from the inside out. Radioactive dust coated every surface. Water was contaminated, food irradiated, air laced with unseen death. There were no warnings, no safety protocols. Children played on radioactive tailings. Workers handled ore with bare hands. Pregnancies ended in tragedy. Cancer rates soared, and all the while government agencies and corporate overlords documented it all, silently, methodically. Internal memos revealed they knew the risks as early as 1943. They called it acceptable collateral. By the 1970s, the secret could no longer be hidden. Residents were dying, demanding answers, but instead of help, they received silence. And soon after, an evacuation order. In 1984, Uravan was declared uninhabitable, not for environmental reasons, but to erase the evidence. Bulldozers came, homes were leveled, graves exhumed, soil scraped away and buried elsewhere. Today, Uravan is gone, not abandoned but obliterated. Roads rerouted, maps altered, even aerial photos tampered with. You can't visit Uravan. You can only stand near where it was and feel the unease that something was there and is no more. But documents surfaced, long sealed, showing that Uravan was more than just a mining town. It was a controlled environment where the psychological effects of slow poisoning were studied. How long would residents ignore symptoms? How much suffering would they endure before revolting? The answers were chilling. Most never did. They trusted, they obeyed, they died. And the experiment was deemed a success. Uravan was not a tragedy, it was a test. And the data gathered there was used in future operations both abroad and at home. This is not history, it is a blueprint. And now we descend into a place where the living built their homes among the dead, where the graves themselves rose in rebellion. Welcome to our next ghost town. In the sweltering marshlands of Louisiana, a town once stood called Frenier. Small, isolated, and seemingly insignificant, Frenier was a quiet settlement of loggers and fishermen along the edge of Lake Pontchartrain. But what happened here in 1915 is a mystery wrapped in myth, cloaked in silence, and buried beneath layers of swamp and fear. Frenier was home to a woman named Julia Brown, known by locals as a healer, midwife, and practitioner of ancient rites, whispered from African and Creole traditions. She was both revered and feared, a woman who held the life and death of the town in her hands. But over time, the townspeople grew wary of Julia's influence. They shunned her, mocked her rituals, and dismissed her warnings. And according to legend, Julia gave one final prophecy: "When I die, I will take the town with me." On September 29, 1915, Julia Brown died. The townspeople gathered for her funeral, dismissing her final words as the ramblings of an old woman. But that same day, a monstrous Category 4 hurricane tore through the region with little warning. Frenier was obliterated, every structure flattened, every resident killed. The swamp swallowed the town whole. Survivors from nearby villages spoke of screams carried on the wind, of the lake turning red, of coffins surfacing and floating through the floodwaters. The death toll was never officially recorded. Frenier vanished from maps. No aid arrived. No rebuilding was attempted. It was as if the town had never existed. But here's what they don't tell you. Government records show that meteorologists had data indicating a massive storm was approaching, yet no warnings were issued to Frenier or surrounding communities. Why? Was it negligence or something else? Local legends tell of strange military activity in the days after the storm, men in unmarked uniforms collecting debris, removing bodies and destroying documents. Julia Brown's house, the only structure partially standing, was burned to the ground. Today, the site is accessible only by boat, and those who visit report hearing singing in the air, voices in Creole, and the sensation of being watched. Some believe Frenier was more than a town. It was a node, a place of spiritual convergence, power, and danger. And when that power was insulted, it demanded reckoning. Was it a curse, a warning, or a cover-up of a force beyond understanding? What happened to Frenier remains unsolved, but now we move to a town erased not by storm, but by silence. The town that built the American dream and was killed for it. Let's continue. Beneath the towering skyline of New York City once lay a forgotten town, Seneca Village. Before Central Park became a jewel of Manhattan, before the land was manicured into curated pathways and gleaming ponds, it was home to a thriving black community, a sanctuary in a city rife with prejudice. Founded in 1825 by freed African Americans, Seneca Village grew rapidly. It was not just a cluster of shacks, as the history books suggest, but a developed neighborhood with homes, churches, schools, and a cemetery. It offered rare dignity, land ownership, self-governance, and protection from the violence that roiled other parts of the city. But power abhors independence. By the 1850s, city leaders began to eye the land. They wanted a park, a grand space to rival the palaces of Europe, a symbol of culture and progress, and Seneca Village stood in the way. What happened next was swift and brutal. Using the tool of eminent domain, the city seized the land. Newspapers ran slanderous articles painting the residents as squatters, criminals, and filth. They demonized the village to justify its destruction. Homes were demolished, graves unearthed, families forced to flee with pennies for their property, and then the silence. For over a century, Seneca Village was erased, not just from the land, but from memory. No plaques, no records, no mention. The park rose, gleaming and pristine, built over bones and broken dreams. But why such violence for a park? Some suggest Seneca Village was more than a threat to landowners. It was a threat to the narrative. It proved that Black Americans could build wealth, community, and stability, that they didn't need to be civilized by white society. And so, it had to be destroyed. The few surviving records hint at something darker. One letter written by a city official mentions cleansing the land of undesirable influence. Another refers to securing access to the mineral springs, believed by some to have been sacred to the Lenape and rich in natural energy. Could Seneca Village have been built on land long known for its spiritual or resource-based power? Was it erased for more than just real estate? Today, archaeologists are slowly unearthing fragments, pieces of homes, dishes, shoes, all evidence of lives lived with purpose and pride. But the system that crushed Seneca Village lives on, rewriting history, sanitizing truth, and selling stolen land as progress. As we go deeper, the next ghost town reveals what happens when greed, industry, and war collide. A town that vanished in a single day. Stay with me. In the remote wilderness of Oregon, a town once rose from nothing, Rajneeshpuram. It wasn't built in the 1800s like the others we've uncovered. No, this town was born in 1981, flourished in just 4 years, and then was wiped from existence by fear, by power, and by something much darker. Rajneeshpuram was the brainchild of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, a controversial Indian guru whose followers purchased over 64,000 acres of land in Wasco County. They built a city from the dust, a sprawling commune with homes, farms, businesses, an airstrip, and even their own police force. But it wasn't just buildings. It was an experiment in control. Members wore red robes, chanted, meditated, and followed the Bhagwan with absolute obedience. To outsiders, it looked like a cult. To insiders, it felt like freedom. But the truth is more complicated and far more disturbing. As the town grew, tensions with neighboring communities intensified. Lawsuits, threats, fear, and then something unprecedented happened. In 1984, over 750 people in nearby the Dalles were poisoned with salmonella in their food. It was the largest bioterror attack in U.S. history. The source? Rajneeshpuram. But this wasn't just random madness. Documents uncovered later revealed meticulous planning, biological agents cultivated in secret labs, the deliberate targeting of political enemies, and plans for further attacks. This wasn't religion, it was weaponized belief. And the Bhagwan? He stayed silent, surrounded by Rolls-Royces and armed guards, while his top aides executed a campaign of psychological and biological warfare. Eventually, federal agents moved in. The commune collapsed, Arrests were made. The Bhagwan fled the country. Rajneeshpuram was disbanded, its buildings bulldozed, its records sealed, its memory erased. But here's the question they don't want you asking. How did a foreign cult build a city, acquire weapons, grade biological agents, and operate openly for years without intervention? Some say they were a pawn, allowed to rise and fall to justify new surveillance laws, expanded domestic intelligence operations, and a redefinition of what constitutes a terrorist. Rajneeshpuram wasn't just a cult, it was a controlled detonation, a real-world simulation of fear, control, and collapse. And the people who lived there, they weren't just followers, they were subjects. Rajneeshpuram is gone now, erased, paved over, its silence deafening. But its blueprint lives on in the way governments study movements, exploit fears, and erase threats. The next ghost town fell not to poison or bullets, but to silence and light, a town sacrificed in the name of the atom. Let's descend further. In the heart of Tennessee's lush hills, a town was born not out of necessity but secrecy. Welcome to Oak Ridge, a place that appeared on no maps, a city that officially did not exist. Built in 1942 as part of the Manhattan Project, Oak Ridge was constructed with breakneck speed, over 75,000 acres seized by eminent domain, entire communities displaced overnight. Barbed wire fences sprang up, roads vanished, and guards appeared on every corner. Within months, 70,000 people lived and worked inside Oak Ridge's gates, but they didn't know why. Every worker, from janitor to scientist, was given only a sliver of the truth. Do your job, don't ask questions. Those who did found themselves disappeared, quietly reassigned or simply gone. And yet, Oak Ridge operated with ruthless efficiency. Massive facilities, Y-12, K-25, and X-10 buzzed day and night, refining uranium for the world's first atomic bombs. Workers handled radioactive materials with bare hands, inhaled poisoned air, drank contaminated water, all without warning. The goal was victory. The cost was irrelevant. Even after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oak Ridge didn't stop. It grew into a hub of nuclear production, weapons development, and human experimentation. Yes, experimentation. Recently declassified documents reveal that Oak Ridge was not just building bombs, it was testing the human body against radiation. Hospital patients, often poor or mentally ill, were injected with plutonium and uranium without consent. Pregnant women were given radioactive cocktails. Children were exposed in schools, their growth monitored like lab rats. And when the truth began to leak, Oak Ridge vanished again, this time behind layers of bureaucracy and misdirection. The town still exists, rebranded as a science city, but parts of it remain sealed. Buildings underground, labs off-limits, files still classified. Oak Ridge is not a ghost town in appearance. It thrives. But beneath the surface it is haunted by secrets, by lives taken in silence, by knowledge gained through suffering. And the people who live there, many don't know. They walk streets paved by secrecy, breathe air once laced with death, and send their children to schools built atop forgotten graves. Oak Ridge was never meant to be known. It was designed to hide what power does when unrestrained. And it succeeded. But we are not done. The next ghost town sank not beneath water, but beneath lies. A town silenced by poison, covered by snow, and lost in the far north. Follow me. We're going further. Far above the Arctic Circle, where snow and silence reign, lies the forgotten town of Port Radium. Located on the shores of Canada's Great Bear Lake, Port Radium was established in the 1930s for one reason: to mine pitchblende, a dark, heavy ore rich in uranium. What most don't know is this: the uranium mined here helped build the first atomic bombs. Port Radium wasn't just remote, it was isolated by design. Workers, many of them indigenous Dani men, were told they were mining for medical materials or simply ore. They were given no protective gear, no warnings, no understanding. They carried sacks of radioactive rock on their backs, drank water tainted with heavy metals, and breathed dust laced with invisible death. And they were watched. Government agents recorded their every movement, documenting effects, symptoms, and deaths in silence. These people weren't just labor. They were test subjects. Letters between company officials and government liaisons, now declassified, reveal the truth. They knew. They knew as early as 1936 that radiation levels in Port Radium were lethal, yet production increased, safety requests were denied, and the Dean workers kept dying, quietly, unnoticed, erased. After World War II, the mine was abandoned, not cleaned up, abandoned. Toxic waste was left exposed, the land poisoned, the lake tainted. The Den people, suffering high rates of cancer and birth defects, were told it was genetics, bad luck, or the harsh north. But they knew, they remembered. Their stories were passed in whispers, of coughing up blood, of skin burns, of spirits restless in the night. And when they asked for justice, they were ignored. Port Radium does not appear in most history books. Its role in the Manhattan Project is barely mentioned, yet it was crucial, a silent engine of death that powered a global shift in warfare. Today, Port Radium is a ruin. The snowcoat veers its bones, but beneath that white silence lies radioactive soil. Hunters avoid the area, Geiger counters scream near the old shafts, and yet no formal cleanup has been done. Why? Because to acknowledge Port Radium is to admit to one of the coldest, most calculated acts of environmental and human exploitation in modern history. The land remembers, the people remember, and now, you remember. But we're not done. The next town was buried not by snow or time, but by ash, a town silenced by a volcano and by a government unwilling to save its people. Let's descend further. On the morning of May 18, 1980, the earth beneath Mount St. Helens groaned, and then screamed. But long before the volcano erupted, nestled in its shadow, was a small town called Spirit Lake, a town forgotten by most, ignored by authorities, and ultimately sacrificed. Spirit Lake was more than just cabins and trees. It was home to families, fishermen, and a man named Harry Truman, not the president, but a rugged, defiant caretaker of the land. For decades, locals reported strange tremors, animal migrations, and unnatural geysers erupting from the ground. Elders of the Cowlitz tribe spoke of an ancient pact, that the mountain was alive and that disturbing its heart would bring ruin. But industry didn't listen. Logging companies moved in, carving the forests, destabilizing the soil. Warnings were ignored. And then came the rumble. Weeks before the eruption, Spirit Lake residents begged for help. Scientists warned of disaster, but the government refused evacuation orders. Official records show a staggering delay, bureaucratic red tape, corporate pressure, and the cold calculation that moving people was too costly. What followed was obliteration. The eruption decimated 230 square miles in minutes. Spirit Lake was gone, buried beneath mud, ash, and molten stone. But here's what they won't tell you. Satellite data, later suppressed, showed massive heat signatures days before the eruption, indicating subterranean drilling, possibly linked to geothermal energy experiments. Declassified memos mention unauthorized geological tests near Spirit Lake, conducted by private contractors working under government license. Were they tapping the mountain for power? Or something else? Survivors reported strange lights in the sky days before the eruption. Some claimed to hear rhythmic booming, like machines underground. One man's journal, found months later, reads, "They are disturbing something beneath us. The mountain is angry. We are not meant to be here." Harry Truman refused to leave. He died with his cats, buried under 150 feet of ash. His body was never found. Today, Spirit Lake is a wasteland. The landscape has healed superficially, but the lake itself is tainted, its depths concealing twisted ruins. Divers report that their equipment fails, compasses spin, and a sense of dread chokes the air. Was Spirit Lake a casualty or a cover-up? A town destroyed by nature or by the arrogance of man? You decide. Next, we journey to a town that disappeared in silence. Without disaster, without war, it simply vanished, and no one asks why. Let's go deeper. In the vast plains of Nebraska, there once stood a town called Monowi. Today, it has a population of 1. But this is no quirky human interest story. Monowi's collapse is not about the slow decline of rural life. It is a silent monument to engineered erasure. In the early 1900s, Monowi thrived. It had a post office, a school, businesses, and a community built on farming and trade. But something changed after World War II, subtly, methodically. First, the banks refused loans to local farmers. Then rail lines were rerouted, federal subsidies vanished, the town's infrastructure was starved. Families left, businesses folded, and homes were abandoned. Officially, this was economic decline. Unofficially, it was a strategic withdrawal, a test site for rural depopulation protocols. Declassified USDA reports from the 1950s mention Monowi by name as part of an initiative to consolidate agricultural assets and evaluate population migration incentives. In other words, shut it down and watch what happens. But why? Because Monowi sits atop one of the richest underground aquifers in North America, the Ogallala Aquifer, a source of fresh water more valuable than oil. Private companies had long coveted it, but the town stood in their way. In the 1970s, geological surveys were conducted quietly. Land was bought through shell companies, records were scrubbed, and then the final blow, the interstate highway bypassed Monowi, cutting off its economic lifeline. By the 1990s, Monowi was a ghost town. All but one resident remained, Elsie Eiler, who maintains the town's library and tavern. She pays taxes to herself, maintains the municipal records, and speaks rarely of the past. But here's what's chilling. Aerial photos show heavy truck activity in the fields surrounding Monowi, yet there are no businesses left. Surveillance footage captured unmarked vehicles, drilling equipment, and fenced-in zones with no public access. Are they tapping the aquifer? Is Monowi still being used covertly as a hub for water extraction and resource control? Elsie doesn't say. Some believe she is protected, kept as a symbolic mayor to maintain the illusion of transparency. But Monowi is not dead. It is suspended, a living ghost town stripped of its people, its purpose, and its voice. You can visit, but you won't be told why it vanished. Monowi is a warning. And now we journey to a town erased not by economics but by fire and metal. A town consumed by war before war was even declared. Follow me further. The descent darkens. Deep in the forests of Pennsylvania lies a town you cannot enter, yet one that still burns, literally. Centralia. On the surface, it was a small mining town founded in 1866, carved into the coal-rich veins of the Appalachian Mountains. But in 1962, something happened, or rather, something was done. An underground coal seam caught fire. The official story? A landfill was ignited to reduce waste, and the fire accidentally reached the mines. But that version is riddled with holes. Local testimonies speak of strange activity in the weeks leading up to the fire. Heavy machinery, unmarked trucks, and a sudden push to clean the town's mine shafts. Why? Internal documents from that era, long buried, show that a geological survey identified Centralia's coal as unusually pure, valuable beyond belief. Corporations wanted it, but the town owned the mineral rights, so a solution was engineered. Ignite the mines, let the fire force the residents out, claim eminent domain, take the land, and what lies beneath. The fire spread as planned. Toxic gases seeped into basements, roads buckled, homes became ovens, residents grew sick, children fainted in their classrooms, but aid was minimal, delayed. It wasn't until the 1980s that evacuation orders were issued. Compensation was offered, at a fraction of property value. Many resisted. They were threatened, harassed, surveilled. Some vanished. By 1992, the government invoked eminent domain, seizing every remaining property. Homes were bulldozed, streets closed, zip code revoked. Centralia was wiped off the map. But the fire never stopped. It still burns, deep underground, invisible, insatiable. Satellite images reveal glowing fissures expanding yearly. Scientists can't or won't explain it. Some believe it's no longer coal that fuels the blaze, but something else. Visitors report unnatural heat, electromagnetic interference, and the sensation of being watched. Official access is restricted, roads are blocked. Yet the area remains under surveillance. Why? Because Centralia is more than a disaster site. It is a controlled zone, a living laboratory of environmental warfare, a test, and the lessons learned there have been applied elsewhere. How to depopulate, how to seize land, how to erase towns through accident. Centralia is still dying, and yet it remains silent, burning, forbidden. As we descend further, we uncover a town not destroyed by fire, but swallowed by water, a town whose sacrifice birthed a new empire. The descent continues. Stay with me. Beneath the shimmering surface of California's Lake Berryessa lies a drowned town, Monticello. To the casual eye, the lake is a picturesque reservoir, calm and serene. But beneath its depths is a history of betrayal, sacrifice and control, one the world was never meant to remember. Monticello was once a thriving agricultural community nestled in Berryessa Valley. For over a century, its residents cultivated rich land, built homes, raised families. They believed in the American dream until the government declared that dream obsolete. In the 1950s, the Bureau of Reclamation proposed the Monticello Dam, a massive hydroelectric project aimed at creating the Solano Water Project. On paper, it was progress. In reality, it was conquest. Monticello stood in the way, not just geographically but ideologically. The town was self-sufficient, locally governed, resistant to external influence, and its land sat atop what geological surveys called critical water assets. Private corporations thirsting for control over California's water supply lobbied for the dam. Records show secret meetings between federal agents and corporate stakeholders, plans drawn up before the public was ever informed. Residents were given notice, leave or be forced out. They protested, they sued, they lost. In 1957, Monticello was evacuated. Homes were bulldozed, orchards razed, and even the cemetery was exhumed, its coffins carted away in the dead of night. Then came the water. Slowly, methodically, the valley was flooded. Roads disappeared, buildings vanished. The town was submerged, memory erased. Today, all that remains is the Eerie glory hole, a giant drain that swallows water into an abyss, a symbol of the town's fate. Divers who have explored the lake's depths report seeing remnants of homes, rusted tools, and fragments of lives lost. One diver claimed to hear a church bell tolling underwater. Officer Eerie, no such bell existed, but Monticello refuses to be silent. Water levels occasionally drop during droughts, revealing parts of the town, foundations, roads, broken fences, and each time the past threatens to surface. Why was Monticello sacrificed? Because water is power. He who controls the flow controls the people. Monticello's death birthed a new empire of water politics, one where cities thrive while others wither. And it began with a drowning. We now journey to a place buried not by nature, but by greed, where entire towns were swallowed by mountains of waste. Follow me deeper. The darkness is thickening. In the quiet hills of West Virginia, the town of Picture once pulsed with life. Schools rang with laughter, families filled the streets, and the economy thrived on the back of mining, zinc and lead, extracted in staggering quantities. But beneath the prosperity, something monstrous was growing, and Picture would pay the ultimate price. From the early 20th century, Picture sat atop one of the largest lead and zinc deposits in North America. Mining companies descended like vultures, carving vast tunnels beneath the town. For decades, ore was hauled out, profits soared, and the ground beneath Picture hollowed like rotted bone. Waste from the mines, known as chat, was piled into towering mounds, grey mountains of toxic residue that children played on, families picnicked beside. No one warned them, no one told them the truth, that the very air they breathed, the soil they tilled, and the water they drank were poisoned. But they knew. By the 1980s, children showed signs of lead poisoning, stunted growth, neurological damage, mysterious illnesses. Tests revealed lead levels 5 times higher than safe limits, and still, Companies denied responsibility. Lawsuits were filed, evidence buried, whistleblowers vanished. Then came the collapse. The mines beneath Picha began to cave in, roads cracked, homes sank, and sinkholes swallowed entire blocks. A government study labeled Picha uninhabitable. The response? Evacuation. Not aid, not justice, evacuation. Families were forced out, given meager compensation. Their homes were razed, streets cordoned off, and then Picha was erased from maps, from memory. The town was declared dead in 2009. But here's the truth. Picha wasn't an accident. It was a resource extraction experiment. Profit above life, control through neglect. Records show federal agencies knew of the contamination for decades. Internal memos acknowledged population-level toxicize, but deemed the risk acceptable given economic output. Translation: your life is worth less than the ore beneath your feet. Today, Picha is a toxic wasteland. The chat piles still stand, leaching poison into wind and rain. The water glows with iridescent hues, sickly, unnatural. Few dare enter. And those who do speak of silence, oppressive, unnatural, haunted. Picha is a grave, not just of a town, but of trust, of health, of forgotten lives. The next ghost town wasn't poisoned by metal, but by industry of a different kind. A town built on secrecy, addiction, and power, a place that never wanted to be found. Come further. The abyss deepens. In the endless plains of Nevada, hidden behind desert winds and layers of silence, lies a place not marked on maps, a ghost town called St. Thomas. But its story is not just about disappearance, it's about how power rewrites reality. Founded in the 1860s by Mormon settlers, St. Thomas thrived on fertile land, nestled between rivers. For generations it stood as a beacon of resilience in the arid landscape. Then came the government. In the 1920s, the federal Hoover Dam project began, promising energy and water control for a growing empire of western cities. The Colorado River would be tamed, its power harnessed, but at a cost. St. Thomas sat in the path of the future, destined to drown beneath what would become Lake Mead. Officials issued notices. Leave, relocate, this is progress. But residents resisted. They had built lives, buried their dead, and held deeds to their land. Resistance was met with force. Court battles, threats, delayed compensation. Some gave up. Others were forced out. The last resident, Hugh Lord, set fire to his own home in 1938 as the floodwaters rose, refusing to let the government erase his town without defiance. As Lake Mead filled, St. Thomas vanished. But that wasn't the end. During droughts, the lake recedes, and like a corpse rising from a shallow grave, the skeleton of St. Thomas emerges. Foundations, streets, ruins. The past refuses to stay buried. And here's the deeper truth. St. Thomas was more than just collateral damage. Documents show early plans for the dam deliberately targeted low-income and minority communities along the river. The goal wasn't just water, it was control. Control over land, over migration, over development. St. Thomas was sacrificed, not for necessity, but for empire. And now, Lake Mead is dying. Water levels plummet. The skeleton of St. Thomas is visible again, exposed, accusing. Visitors walk its streets unaware of the full weight of history beneath their feet. The air is dry but heavy. Locals speak of voices in the wind, a pressure in the chest, the sense that something watches from beneath the cracked earth. St. Thomas is a symbol. That progress often means erasure, that control demands sacrifice, and that no town is safe when empire hungers. Our next descent takes us to a place shrouded not in water but in shadow. A town created, manipulated, and then abandoned by intelligence agencies. Follow me deeper. The veil thins. Buried in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky lies the spectral memory of a town called Dawson Springs. To the world, it was a forgotten spa town, known for its mineral springs and brief prosperity in the early 1900s. But behind its rise and mysterious fall lies something darker. An experiment cloaked in patriotism and secrecy, orchestrated by hands the public was never meant to see. During the Cold War, Dawson Springs was quietly selected for a federal health and wellness initiative, sold to the locals as an economic revival. But in truth, it was chosen for its isolation, its poverty, and the malleability of its population. Beneath the cover of a new National Wellness Institute, government and private contractors began human trials, testing water additives, psychological conditioning techniques, and experimental pharmaceuticals. Residents were told the mineral-rich water had healing properties, that their participation in health studies would benefit America. They signed forms they didn't understand, they drank what was provided, and then the symptoms began. Insomnia, paranoia, violent mood swings, fertility issues, reports of hallucinations. Families quietly broke apart, but when townspeople questioned the cause, federal agents arrived. They cited national security, dismissed concerns, and buried records. Medical professionals who spoke out were discredited. A local doctor, John Harlan, vanished in 1961 after publishing a paper titled, "The Water is Not Clean." His body was never found. Eventually, Dawson Springs began to empty. Economic support was withdrawn. Businesses collapsed. The town was gutted, its people scattered. By the late 1970s, Dawson Springs was nearly abandoned, the springs sealed, and all references to the health initiative scrubbed from public record. But the truth leaked. In 2007, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered fragments of a project titled Aegis Phase 2. It detailed population behavior modification trials, water vector experimentation, and social dissolution metrics. Dawson Springs was not just a town, it was a testbed, a place where control was honed, not through force but through compliance, through trust weaponized against its own people. Today, the town's ruins remain, choked by vines and silence. Locals refuse to enter. Paranormal investigators report electromagnetic anomalies, disembodied voices, and equipment failure near the old springhouse. Dawson Springs is a scar, on land, on memory, on freedom. Our next descent takes us west, to a town extinguished not by disease or disaster, but by the cold mechanics of commerce and shadow governance. We go deeper still, listen closely. In the vast desert expanse of Arizona, there once thrived a town called Maricopa Wells, a critical hub, a lifeline in the middle of the barren Sonoran landscape. For centuries, this oasis fed empires. First, it sustained native tribes, Akchin, Pima, and Tohono O'odham, who guarded its life-giving springs. Then it fed stagecoaches, travelers, soldiers, and fortune-seekers. But today, Maricopa Wells is dust, obliterated not by drought but by design. Beneath its sands lies a history of sabotage and systemic erasure. In the mid-1800s, U.S. expansionists targeted the region. Maricopa Wells offered water control and strategic dominance. The government negotiated with local tribes on paper. In practice, treaties were ignored and land was seized. The wells became a military asset, guarded and exploited. But here's what most never learned. Beneath Maricopa Wells, massive natural aquifers pulsed with pure water, enough to support a metropolis. Corporate interests, backed by government, plotted to secure that water for future development. By the early 1900s, plans to divert and privatize the aquifer were underway. Documents from the Bureau of Land Management reveal a directive. Reduce surface access to Maricopa Wells, initiate settlement suppression. Translation: shut the town down, poison the wells if needed. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly the springs dried. The people, both indigenous and settlers, sickened. Some died. Blame was cast on weather, mismanagement, even divine will. But internal correspondence from the Salt River Project, a powerful water consortium, exposes the truth. Underground dams had been constructed miles away to block water flow, rerouting it to feed Phoenix's rise. Maricopa Wells was starved, its people driven off. The town crumbled, then vanished. And in its place, nothing. No monument, no records in textbooks. Just barren land, fenced and patrolled. Today, satellite images show industrial activity nearby, unmarked pipelines, subterranean facilities, and restricted zones. Locals report strange vibrations beneath the earth, the hum of machines and men in unmarked vehicles. Maricopa Wells was erased, not by nature's wrath but by human greed. It is a prototype of control, resource seizure masked as progress. The town lives only in fragments, in tribal memory, in secret files, in the land's aching silence. As we go further, we reach a town that didn't just vanish. It was buried by concrete and steel, its remains hidden beneath one of America's most iconic monuments, a ghost town entombed in plain sight. The descent darkens. Stay close. Beneath the towering expanse of the Hoover Dam, a monument to American ambition, lies a town that no one speaks of, a place buried not just under water, but under decades of secrecy and steel. Welcome to St. Thomas, Nevada, again. But this time, understand it wasn't just drowned. It was sacrificed. Hoover Dam, completed in 1936, wasn't simply a feat of engineering. It was a control mechanism, over water, over power, and over people. And St. Thomas was in the way. In public records, St. Thomas was a farming town, established by Mormon pioneers in the 1860s, thriving on the banks of the Virgin River. Its people lived off the land, independent, self-reliant, and unwilling to cede control to distant bureaucrats. That independence sealed their fate. In secret meetings between federal engineers and energy conglomerates, St. Thomas was designated expendable. They wanted Lake Mead, a reservoir to power Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and the growing industrial empire of the West. But they needed the land beneath St. Thomas, so the plan was executed. First, the value of local crops was undercut through tariffs and manipulated markets. Farmers struggled, then failed. Next, land rights were challenged. Legal cases dragged on for years, draining residents' resources. Then came the final blow, eminent domain. St. Thomas was condemned. Residents were ordered to leave. Compensation was minimal. Appeals denied. The last holdout, Hugh Lord, set fire to his house in protest before riding away, his defiance buried beneath rising waters. But here's the darker truth. Before the flooding, government agents scoured St. Thomas, not to help residents, but to strip the town of anything valuable. Historical artifacts vanished, buildings were dismantled piece by piece, and beneath some homes, subterranean tunnels were sealed, never to be investigated. What were they hiding? Documents reveal that beneath St. Thomas lay ancient indigenous sites, burial grounds, ceremonial chambers, possibly even pre-Columbian artifacts, evidence that could rewrite history buried forever beneath Lake Mead. And now the water recedes. Drought has uncovered skeletal remains of buildings, rusted machinery, and roads leading nowhere. Visitors report an eerie hum near the ruins, strange figures seen at dusk, and warnings from park rangers to not go off the path. St. Thomas is no longer silent. It is rising. And with it, the truth threatens to surface. Truth about control, about manipulation, about history, rewritten by the powerful. Next, we go to a town that vanished not beneath water or stone, but beneath lies. A town erased for the sake of a lie that shaped the modern world. Come further. The veil is thinning. In the heart of New Mexico's desolate plains, there once stood a town called Oscura. Today, it is missing, not destroyed, not abandoned, missing. No ruins, no markers, no graves. Just blank maps, fenced land, and silence. But Oscura was real, and its erasure marks one of the darkest convergences of power, science, and deception in American history. Founded in the late 1800s along a railway line, Oscura was a small ranching town, quiet, self-sufficient, but in 1942, everything changed. That year, the U.S. government began acquiring land for what they called the Manhattan Project. Oscura sat within the zone. Officially, it was evacuated to protect national security. Unofficially, it became a testing ground, not for bombs, but for psychological control. Declassified files from 1997 reveal that Oscura was repurposed as a site for population behavior studies, a euphemism for covert human experimentation. Residents were not relocated, they were subjected to radiation exposure, atmospheric contaminants, and behavioral conditioning techniques designed to manipulate fear, obedience, and memory. They were observed, measured, and ultimately erased. One document titled Operation Quiet Sky details a plan to remove all physical evidence of Oscura's existence, structures dismantled, land razed, public records scrubbed. Even birth and death certificates were altered or destroyed. Survivors, officially none, but scattered accounts exist. Men and women who claim to have lived in Oscura, now elderly, silenced, disbelieved. One woman, interviewed in 2003, spoke of the blue mist that descended over the town at night, the voices on the radios that weren't tuned to any station, and the disappearances. First animals, then children. She was labeled delusional. Her name was never released. The land where Oscura stood is now part of the White Sands Missile Range, a restricted zone. Patrolled day and night, satellite imagery shows peculiar anomalies, perfectly circular depressions, discolorations in the earth, and heat signatures inconsistent with natural patterns. No entry is permitted, and anyone who approaches is warned away. Oscura is more than a ghost town. It is a phantom, a hole in reality, a town sacrificed on the altar of secrecy and power, a place that did not fall to time, but was swallowed by agenda. As we descend further, we reach a town that was consumed by industry of another kind, not military but pharmaceutical. A town poisoned for profit, forgotten for convenience. We continue. The descent sharpens. Truth cuts deep. Nestled in the wooded hills of Virginia near the Appalachian Trail, once lay a town called Ravensford. On no official map will you find it today, yet its echo lingers. Whispers of a community erased not by natural disaster, not by war, but by a slow, deliberate poisoning. Ravensford was founded in the early 1900s, a small logging town built on timber and tenacity. It grew steadily, fed by forests and streams rich with life, but in the 1950s the town changed. A pharmaceutical company, Camden Labs, arrived, offering jobs, modernization, prosperity. The town welcomed them, and then the sickness began. First it was minor, rashes, fatigue, strange metallic tastes, but soon it turned deadly. Children developed rare cancers, animals died en masse. Wells turned black, the air grew thick, and the forests withered. Yet the company denied everything. Coincidence, they claimed. Unrelated. But internal memos, leaked decades later, revealed Camden Labs had been disposing of chemical waste directly into the town's water supply. The chemicals, experimental compounds, never approved, never tested for environmental safety. Why Ravensford? Because it was isolated, forgotten, and expendable. Government regulators were complicit. Inspection reports were falsified. Whistleblowers were silenced, threatened, or disappeared. One, an engineer named Philip Greer, recorded hours of testimony, detailing toxic leaks, cover-ups, and the company's plans to relocate or suppress the population. His tapes vanished after his death, officially ruled a suicide, though his family insists otherwise. By the 1970s, Ravensford was a town of the dying. Lawsuits were filed, delayed, dismissed, lost. Finally, in 1983, the state declared Ravensford uninhabitable. The residents were relocated under emergency order. Camden Labs paid undisclosed settlements, then rebranded, vanished, and the town was razed. Forest was replanted, roads buried, and Ravensford faded. Deliberately, methodically. Today the area is labeled protected forest land, but hikers speak of dead zones, places where no birds sing, where the ground is brittle, and where strange artifacts, rusted signs, collapsed wells, protrude like bones from the earth. Soil tests conducted unofficially show elevated toxin levels decades later. Ravensford was not just poisoned, it was erased, sacrificed to protect profits and reputations. Its story, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, remains a silent indictment of corporate impunity. But we are not done. Ahead lies a town obliterated not for industry but ideology, a town purged by religious manipulation, psychological control, and mass deception. Prepare yourself. This descent turns inward. The darkness is no longer beneath our feet, it's within us. Along the windswept shores of Maine, nestled against craggy cliffs and violent tides, once stood a coastal village called Black Hollow. Today, it is absent from all maps, its very name erased. But its memory persists in fragments, in salt-stained journals and forgotten maritime logs. Black Hollow was founded in the late 1700s by a group of settlers who sought isolation from the mainland. They built a fishing village, self-sufficient and wary of outsiders. But over time, Black Hollow gained a darker reputation. Ships passing its shores reported strange lights on the cliffs, symbols etched into stone, chanting heard over the crashing surf, and boats that vanished after docking. By 1823, the U.S. Navy conducted an investigation, prompted by reports of missing cargo vessels. What they found was unsettling. A town untouched by modern influence, its people pale, gaunt, and silent. Records note significant signs of inbreeding and a cultic social structure. The Navy withdrew, classifying the town non-intervention necessary. But why? Because Black Hollow had become a node in a much larger web. Documents declassified in 1991 revealed Black Hollow's participation in maritime trade of a different kind, smuggling of illicit goods, arms, and even people under the protection of secretive East Coast merchant houses. In exchange for silence, Black Hollow was granted autonomy. No taxes, no law, no interference. Over time, the town's leaders grew powerful, manipulating tides and knowledge. Locals claimed they could call the fog, and that the sea answered to them. Superstition? Perhaps. But by the late 1800s, ships refused to dock. Stories circulated of visitors who went ashore and never returned. Those who escaped spoke of ceremonies at the water's edge, hooded figures, stone altars, and blood offerings to something ancient beneath the waves. Then, in 1904, a great storm struck, or, so the records say. In truth, it wasn't the storm that destroyed Black Hollow, it was a coordinated operation. Naval ships surrounded the coast, cannons fired, flames consumed the town. Survivors were not rescued, they were silenced. The land was quarantined, declared unstable. Black Hollow was purged. But to this day, local fishermen report strange lights offshore. Boats malfunction near the old bay. Some say the fog moves against the wind, carrying voices and the sound of ritual drums. Black Hollow may be gone, but the sea remembers. And it hungers. Next, we turn inland to a town that didn't just die. It was consumed by fire and never stopped burning. The abyss deepens. Keep descending. Deep in the coal-rich hills of Pennsylvania lies a ghost town unlike any other. Centralia, a place where fire crawls beneath your feet, where the ground breathes toxic smoke, and where the earth itself rebels. But what the world was told about Centralia, a tragic accident, a mine fire gone wrong, is only a fragment of the truth. In 1962, the official story begins. A landfill fire near an abandoned mine ignites a coal seam. The fire spreads uncontrollably underground, and for decades it burns, unstoppable, invisible, deadly. Roads buckle, trees die, homes sink. The government declares the town condemned. Residents are relocated and Centralia becomes a wasteland, a perpetual inferno. But what if that fire wasn't an accident? Dig deeper into records before 1962, and you'll find whispers of something more sinister. Centralia sat atop vast anthracite coal reserves, one of the richest deposits in the region, and powerful interests had long sought control of that resource. In the 1950s, secret meetings took place between energy corporations and state officials discussing centralized extraction methods and population relocation strategies. Declassified memos revealed that attempts to buy out residents failed, locals refused to sell. Shortly after the fire began, but it wasn't fought, not truly. Initial efforts were minimal, funding mysteriously vanished and experts were ignored. One geologist, Dr. Emil Hartmann, claimed the fire was intentionally stoked, accelerants used to drive people out and make the land unusable for habitation, but perfect for corporate seizure. He died in a car crash 2 months after publishing his findings. Witnesses describe unmarked trucks near the mine entrance days before the fire. Some recall hearing explosions underground, and yet all official investigations closed abruptly, citing insufficient evidence. Today, Centralia burns on, a toxic scar. Why? With poisonous gases seeping from cracks in the earth, warning signs scattered like tombstones. Only a handful of residents remain, defiant or forgotten. The land is now protected, off-limits, patrolled. Yet aerial scans show ongoing activity, vehicles entering restricted zones, new drilling sites and fenced-off shafts. Centralia wasn't just a casualty of fire, it was an experiment in forced abandonment, resource conquest, and psychological warfare. A warning to others: resist, and you will be erased. The next ghost town was never meant to be found, built for a single purpose, then discarded like a failed experiment. We go further, into the desert, into secrecy, into shadows. Do you feel it? The truth is clawing its way to the surface. In the searing heat of Nevada's high desert, buried beneath layers of sand and silence, there exists the forgotten remains of a place known only by a code name: Project Hamlet. It was never a town in the traditional sense, but a constructed illusion, a meticulously crafted false community built by the US military in the early 1950s. Its purpose: to test the threshold of human resilience under covert conditions. Hamlet was part of a classified series of experiments, Operation Chariot, designed to simulate societal collapse in a controlled environment. The town was populated by volunteers, ex-convicts, and undesirable civilians who were offered clemency, money, or protection. What they weren't told was that Hamlet was wired for surveillance, manipulation, and destruction. The buildings were real, the people unaware they were part of an experiment. From day one, resources were restricted. Food, water, electricity, rations were controlled by hidden observers in underground bunkers. Then, the social experiments began. Strange events were staged. Power outages, false radio broadcasts, mock attacks by foreign enemies. Paranoia spread. People turned on each other. Psychological warfare unfolded in real time. But that was only phase 1. In phase 2, chemical agents were released, mild at first, then progressively more severe. Residents became ill. Memory loss, aggression, hallucinations. Some disappeared, removed by night, never to return. Those left behind were told they had fled, but files later revealed systematic elimination. Hamlet's true purpose was to measure the collapse of order and obedience under strain. How long would people comply? When would they resist? And most chilling of all, how could fear be weaponized to engineer control? By 1955, Hamlet was deemed complete. The remaining residents were evacuated under the guise of a nuclear threat. The town was demolished, its ruins buried under desert sand. Officially, it never existed, but aerial photos from the 1970s show ghostly outlines. Streets, structures, now faded. And recently unearthed documents detail ongoing replication sites, modeled after Hamlet, used in modern urban settings to test crowd control, social behavior, and compliance under duress. Project Hamlet wasn't a one-time atrocity. It was a template. Its methods, refined and repurposed, are echoed in modern policies, surveillance systems, and societal engineering. The ghosts of Hamlet don't haunt the desert. They haunt us. The next town fell to nature, they said, but nature doesn't leave behind geometric scars, nor does it make people vanish without a trace. Prepare. The final descent begins. On the fringes of Alaska's endless wilderness, beyond the Arctic Circle and forgotten by most maps, once stood a settlement known only to a few as Whitmore. Officially, it was a remote outpost for fur traders and trappers, abandoned due to environmental instability. But that explanation masks something far stranger, a vanishing wrapped in mathematical precision and unnatural silence. Whitmore was founded in the 1920s as a mining town. Gold, uranium, and rare earth metals were discovered in the nearby mountains, and with them came fortune seekers. Within a decade, the town flourished. But in 1934, the town's growth abruptly stopped. The reason? A series of unexplained seismic events, small quakes, always measured at exactly 3.33 on the Richter scale, occurring in perfect intervals every 72 hours. Scientists were baffled. The quakes never varied in strength or frequency. Locals began to notice other patterns: animals migrating in exact circles, trees growing at unnatural angles, and voices heard echoing at precise times. Time itself seemed altered. Clocks malfunctioned, and some residents reported lost time, with hours missing from memory. Then came the disappearances. First, individuals, then entire families. No signs of struggle, no tracks, just vanished, leaving meals on tables, fires burning. Panic spread. A government geological team arrived, set up monitoring stations, and within days declared the area geologically unsound. Evacuation was ordered, but a whistleblower, an engineer named Paul Hennings, recorded that the quakes were not natural. They emanated from beneath the town, from symmetrical chambers buried deep underground. Chambers not carved by miners, but seemingly designed, constructed. His notes describe metallic resonance in the earth as if the land itself was hollow and humming. He theorized Whitmore was built atop an ancient structure, non-human in. Beneath the rolling plains of South Dakota once stood a town named Avalon, a name now lost to the corridors of power, buried beneath cement, steel, and silence. Avalon wasn't large, no more than 2,000 souls, but its fate marks one of the darkest experiments in America's history of control. In the early 1980s, Avalon was selected, targeted, though the people were never told. It became the site of a classified program known as Prometheus Drift, a collaboration between defense contractors, tech conglomerates, and the Department of Energy. The objective? To transform Avalon into the first fully integrated surveillance town, a prototype for total monitoring and behavioral prediction. Without consent or disclosure, every home, school, store, and street was embedded with sensors, microphones, and cameras, cloaked as upgrades funded by grants. Utility poles weren't just for power, they carried data lines linked to underground servers. Residents became data points, tracked 24/7. But the experiment didn't stop at observation. Behavioral manipulation was next. Gasoline was subtly altered, releasing vapors that affected cognition. Water was laced with lithium derivatives, dampening aggression and critical thought. The town's only radio station broadcast subliminal tones, frequencies designed to evoke compliance, submission, fear. Over months, Avalon changed. People grew docile, detached, emotionless. Crime disappeared, but so did laughter, spontaneity, and free will. School children stared blankly, relationships dissolved, suicide rates quietly surged, and those who questioned reality were labeled unstable, institutionalized, or simply vanished. One technician, Michael Reeve, broke protocol. Horrified by the results, he leaked internal documents and video footage, families monitored as lab rats, charts measuring psychological decline, memos celebrating operational success. Reeve was arrested for treason. His trial was closed to the public. His sentence? Unknown. Then the shutdown began. In 1986, Avalon was bought out by a private entity. Residents were offered relocation packages. Refuse and legal pressure mounted, eminent domain, code violations, threats. One by one they left. Buildings were bulldozed. The land was sealed under a massive facility labeled Agricultural Research Center. But no crops grow there, only silence. Drones patrol, roads end abruptly at razor wire. Surveillance succeeded. Avalon proved that control need not be violent. It can be quiet, technological, and total. Today, Prometheus Drift's methods have gone global, integrated into smart cities, digital platforms, and data ecosystems. The ghost of Avalon lives in every camera, every sensor, every unseen algorithm. The next town marks the penultimate descent, a place erased not for power, but for what it discovered. A secret too old, too dangerous to be known. We are almost there. One final veil remains. In the arid desolation of Arizona's painted desert, beyond the reach of highways or known trails, once stood a town named Ilara's Crossing. Its story has been scrubbed from public memory, not because it was dangerous, but because it uncovered something ancient, something the architects of power never intended to be revealed. Founded in the late 1800s by a coalition of settlers, prospectors, and scientists, Ilara's Crossing was built upon the discovery of peculiar artifacts, black stone obelisks etched with symbols buried beneath layers of sediment, predating any known civilization. At first, these finds were dismissed as geological anomalies, but when one of the obelisks was unearthed intact, strange events began. Machinery failed, compasses spun wildly, and at night the stone emitted low-frequency hums that resonated through the bones of every man, woman, and child. The town's founder, Dr. Elias Morvan, believed they had stumbled upon a remnant of a pre-human intelligence, a civilization lost to time, perhaps deliberately. His journals, found decades later, describe the obelisks as conduits, not merely markers. He warned they were designed to awaken something dormant, something vast, collective, and alien to human understanding. In 1901, the U.S. government intervened. The town was quarantined under a fabricated smallpox outbreak. Soldiers arrived, not with medical aid, but with excavation equipment and explosives. Residents were told to evacuate. Those who refused were detained. Some resisted. They were never seen again. The obelisks were removed under heavy guard, loaded onto unmarked rail cars and transported to unknown destinations. Ilara's Crossing was erased, not just physically, but informationally. Census records deleted, maps redrawn, even weather reports from that region altered to deter exploration. Satellite images today show a vast geometric depression worm. Here the town once stood, perfectly circular, almost ritualistic in design. Amateur explorers who approach the site report GPS failure, auditory hallucinations, and an overwhelming sense of dread. One described it as standing on the edge of a mind not your own. Declassified files from Project Aeon, a top-secret military program, confirm Ilara's Crossing was deemed a Class Red anomaly. The conclusion? The obelisks were to be studied, then hidden, as their knowledge posed an existential risk to current socio-political structures. In short, they couldn't control it, so they buried it, and the town that found it. Our next step is the final one. A place not just lost to time, but to memory itself. A town where the veil between what is real and what is constructed collapses. Prepare yourself. Once you see it, there is no return. At the edge of reality, obscured by forests that never end and roads that loop upon themselves, lies the legend of Wraithmoor, a town spoken of only in fragments, in the confessions of the mad, in journal pages found clutched in frozen hands. No map has ever marked its location. No satellite has ever captured its form. Yet for centuries, Wraithmoor has surfaced in records, always briefly, always erased. Founded, it is said, in the early 1700s by settlers fleeing religious persecution, Wraithmoor became a sanctuary for those seeking absolute freedom, freedom from church, from crown, from law. But what they created was not freedom. It was detachment, a severance from the known world, a descent into something else. The town's records, smuggled out by a lone cartographer in 1794, speak of the Great Silence. A force, a presence that permeated the air. No birds, no insects, no wind, just silence so profound it altered perception. The settlers worshipped it, not as a god but as a truth, the final truth. They built no churches, no monuments. They built mirrors, thousands of them arranged in perfect geometries around the town's center, reflecting the forest, the sky themselves. Over time, their reflections changed. Faces became distorted, unfamiliar. People began to disappear, not with violence, but with forgetting. One by one, names were lost. Memories faded. Families ceased to recognize each other. Wraithmoor was becoming something less than a town, less than a place. It was unraveling. By the 1800s, travelers who stumbled upon it reported time distortions, watches spinning wildly, days lost in hours. Some said the town was a ruin, others found it pristine, inhabited. Some returned aged decades, others not at all. Then Wraithmoor was gone, or perhaps it never was. Government interest emerged in the 1950s. A project called Eidolon, run by DARPA, sought to locate non-Euclidean settlements in remote regions. Wraithmoor was priority 1. Recon teams sent into the region vanished. Only one transmission was ever received, a whispered phrase, "The reflection watches." Since then, the region has been marked as restricted wilderness, yet hikers still vanish. Strange light phenomena have been recorded, and mirror shards have been found embedded in trees. Wraithmoor isn't a ghost town, it is a fracture. A place where identity dissolves, where truth reflects itself endlessly until nothing remains. Comment below this phrase to lock your transformation. I have seen the reflection. Say it again. I have seen the reflection. One final step remains. The end of the descent. The forgotten town beneath all others. The origin of the forgotten. Stay with me. Beneath the cracked soil of the American heartland, below layers of stone, bone, and time, lies the final town. Not built, but revealed. Not remembered, but buried in the marrow of forgotten ancestors. It has no name, only a symbol, etched into ancient stone found in scattered ruins from Ohio to Nebraska. The town is whispered in lost languages, hidden in myths of the first people, and feared by tribes who dare not speak of it. But in 1891, a farmer near Cairo, Illinois, unearthed something that should have remained buried. Digging a well, he struck stone, polished black, carved with symbols no one could read. Days later, his family vanished. His house burned. Only the well remained, exhaling cold air and a sound like distant voices. Soon others came, scholars, occultists, government agents. What they found was a network of tunnels beneath the earth, perfectly cut, extending for miles. Inside, evidence of a town not built by modern man. Tools of unknown material, circular chambers aligned to stars, and walls that pulsed faintly with blue light. Then people began to change. First, nightmares, shared visions of a towering figure with no face, of cities consumed by silence, of clocks without hands. Then came the disappearances. Whole dig teams gone overnight. Their gear intact, their names erased from records. Those who returned were not themselves, mute, hollow, staring endlessly into mirrors. In 1903, the federal government seized the land under quarantine. The tunnels were collapsed, the symbol was declared cultural graffiti, and all findings were confiscated. But leaks persisted. In 1947, as part of Project Winterfold, a covert agency conducted tests at the site. Audio recordings from the expedition captured rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat and a phrase repeated by all who entered. I remember forgetting. Then, nothing. The town beneath remains, not dead beer, but waiting. Its purpose unknown, its builders gone, or perhaps not. The truth. This town is not a ruin. It is a mechanism, a memory trap, a womb for something not yet born. Every forgotten town, every vanished soul, they spiral back here, drawn to the source. And now you have seen it, heard it, felt it. You cannot unsee. Comment below. I am the forgotten. Again, I am the forgotten. Like, share, subscribe. Because history is not written by the victors, it is buried by them. And we are here to exhume it. This is history's dark mirror, and the reflection has only begun. If this journey through America's forgotten and forbidden towns has shaken something deep within you, if you feel the weight of truth pressing against the lies you've been fed, then it's time to act. Like this video to ensure these dark truths are not buried again. Share it with those who are ready to see beyond the veil. And subscribe to History's Dark Mirror, where hidden histories are exhumed, one forbidden secret at a time. Hit the notification bell because what comes next will change everything.